Okay, so Allison, thanks for joining us again, and thank you all for everyone who's online. And so, for those of you who are joining us, what we're doing here in the next couple weeks, I guess we have still, is in May of 2020, I drove out to Philadelphia, and I went to Allison's home, and we spent the whole afternoon. I shot an interview that ended up being over 5 hours, and I broke it up into five pieces. And recently I was kind of revisiting some of that interview, and I'm like, God, there's a lot of good stuff in here, and a lot of people haven't seen the latter part. So there's the first part has like almost 50,000 views, but then each later part, people don't want to sit around and watch a 5 hour interview. Um, but but I was like, there's a lot of good stuff in here, so I thought it would be a neat opportunity to kind of revisit some of that and then follow it up with a Q&A with Allison. So we're doing that over the next couple of weeks here. We did one last Sunday. So every Sundays and Wednesdays until we get through the thing. So this is part two. We're going to show part two of it, which is about a little less than an hour long. And then Allison will come back on for a Q&A. But we do have one quick question that already popped up on the YouTube live stream. Oh, we have two of them. So we'll go ahead and knock these two questions out. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And will say this: last week, someone made a comment that one of our volumes was higher than the others. I didn't hear that when I listened to it like on the live stream. So if anybody has any issues with the audio or video or whatever, let me know and I'll try to troubleshoot it. So Allison, question. In a few sentences, would you describe what you think our world will look like in 2050, also in 2030?
Uh, 2050 and 2030?
Oh, I'm
Is
sorry.
that
No, 2025 and 2030. My bad.
2025 and 2030? Well, I hate to try to predict exactly what's going to happen because I don't know. I think that I feel like it's identity systems are going to be set up for the vast and I think it's going to be sold as a convenience. And I think increasingly the education systems, the electronic healthcare systems, public benefit systems will all start to be uh, run through digital currency with incentivized elements to it. Now, in a under 10-year time horizon, it's hard to imagine that. I drive around, like I've gone, visiting place. I've had a chance to be out in different parts of the country, and some places pretty affluent communities with large homes and things, and I'm still having a hard time imagining. It looks so normal, like how these things are going to change up in terms of consolidation of uh, what people imagine to be private wealth. I would say most of the nice homes and everything out there are not actually outright owned by the people who have them. They're mortgaged, and they're in possession of the banks, and then ultimately like BlackRock. But will it look different in 10 years? Like, will they take people's livelihoods from them? Will they be pushed into cities? At what scale will that happen? How will people's retirement portfolios, will they actually attempt to erase, such as they are, people's pensions and people's retirement funds as they exist? I mean, I think once it gets to that point, we're talking more revolutionary types of actions. It's hard to imagine that people would just be sitting still for all of that to happen, for the whole central bank digital currency to roll out. So I guess part of and they're testing the waters too, and all of this is being fed into the simulation systems and factored in for the nudges and the tweaks and the behavioral modifications to get us closer to where they want us. I'm hard time imagining that in a 10-year time horizon, the world is going to be totally different. I think we'll be much more controlled. I think that there will be efforts to make that level of control normal and possibly enjoyable through these digital simulation environments. I think I worry for the children because 10 years is a long time, right? We've got a 2 and 3-year-old, and you're looking out 10 years and they're 12, and what kind of life have they grown up in? Is it under constant threat of some sort of anti-biological activity? What are the health protocols for children over the next decade? Clearly we're all being immersed in more PhD from 2019, which I think the goal will be to be at that level of at least 6G, if not further beyond. And then that is very clear that their goal is to try to get people to sort of live most of their lives in sort of mixed reality holograms. So again, it's the story they tell, and then there's what actually happens. And so I'm not willing to concede that everything that they talk about is actually going to come into play. But I think the level of digital control systems is something that is going to be very ever present. I think the normalization of the synthetic biology will become more present, will become more normalized. And then the challenge will be like, how do we onto our sort of mental faculties, spiritual faculties as this rolls out? How will we navigate all of that? So I don't know if that's the answer people were looking for. I don't have a clear picture. I'm not going to run out and say like dire, that's not from. I think it's very concerning. I think that the systems of control, economic control, biological control, mental control, and then the question is, will we have the wherewithal internally in our own spirits to be anchored through that? Because 10 years is a long way to go. So.
Great. And the stream was chopping up a little bit there, but I did something that hopefully will have fixed it.
Thank you.
Well, it's with these things, it's hard to problem solve too, because the problem could be many different places. But so we have 3 other questions. So I'll just read these 3 questions, and then I'll have you answer.
No, I can only do like 2. I'll forget the third one. I'm terrible.
Oh yeah. We're at a 2 limit.
Like my memory is shot.
Okay. Has Allison seen Archbishop Viggiano's recent public statement, and if so, what did she think of them? So I don't know what this is referring to, but
I haven't seen the statements.
Okay.
I mean, I have my position on the church in all of this. Right. But I mean, that's not to say individual actors may have their own.
Yeah. Well, we had Archbishop. I'm not a fan of the church, but I liked Archbishop Romero. So
that's true.
Can you comment on the African American vaccine hesitancy? I know that's not really your area that you focus on, but is that something you want to say anything about?
Well, I don't know that the specific numbers and rates. Clearly, people have very legitimate reasons to be concerned about experimental medical procedures and on these, because historically there have been really reprehensible things done. And I will say even to the Henrietta Lacks, the idea of the synthetic biology and using people's personal bodily materials for research gain without consent is really something that is important to grapple with. I will say from the early stages of this, and it might come out in this interview, I can't remember, but it was very clear to me with my background of understanding impact investing that the narrative around health disparities in Black communities and Indigenous communities were going to be central to what came after the initial pandemic framing, whenever that gets to be over with, is going to be preventative health care. And so that they would end up weaponizing what were actually real concerns about Black communities, Indigenous communities living in conditions of environmental toxicity, economic stress, mental stress, community level violence, food deserts, many of these things that contributed also intergenerational. So some of those stress carriers were across generations. Those would all end up being factored into these profiles for quote unquote preventative healthcare solutions. And under the guise of helping with what are actually real problems, those communities would be put under further digital surveillance as far as health biosurveillance in the name of addressing chronic illness. And, I have concerns because my framing is that I feel like this is more likely around frequency and nanotechnology, that looking at where some of the cellular placements were, especially in urban areas, a lot of them were being put on public housing, in low-income communities initially in concentrations, that adding more radiation and more frequency to people is certainly not going to improve their health status, but that's what it was going to come out with. So I do find it ironic in that there are significant levels of concern in the Black community around injections, that this is happening in parallel with a major push for diversity, equity, inclusion programs. And I myself will say, I left my job of many years over, and it wasn't necessarily only their decision, but it was part of the city. Any nonprofit affiliated with the city of Philadelphia was requiring either injections or regular weekly testing and masking. And so I on principle stepped out of that job that I'd had for 17 years over that issue. But at the same time, we were doing these very, very robust staff-wide trainings in diversity, equity, inclusion, justice work, with very intentional and I think well-meaning focus on diversity in hiring from our local community, which is predominantly low-income people of color. And so for me, I found it very ironic that what we would be saying is under this framing that we would advance if we were to have new staff positions open with a DEIJ lens, that we would also then be enforcing health protocols on a community that as a whole, in large part, we're questioning the health protocol. So to me, like, there's some cognitive dissonance there that I was never really able to get at with people. And it kind of points out sort of the liberal neo-framing of a lot of this.
Okay. Yeah, and on the nanotech signals issue, I think that thinking and discussing about it is so foreign to most people. It's something, I mean, honestly, it's something I hadn't really even, I mean, I've done a little bit into, people that are concerned about the health impacts of all the cell towers and everything, and that's been around for a while. But like nanotech is so new to most people. They don't know anything at all about it. It's not really talked about much in the mainstream media or anywhere else. So like to try to spark up that conversation is difficult because it's so so foreign to people.
I mean, it is until you start to look into the research papers. And, really the push for this has gone back at least to the late 1980s, early 1990s. So it's not a new field. It's just something that isn't widely covered. And, there have been a lot of concerns, mostly some of it is around the narrative framing of precision medicine and cancer treatments and things like that. So when you find it, it's within this context of like, oh, it could only be helpful. But, I've mentioned I'm working my way through Alana's new book, which is, like a doorstopper. And, it's hard because it's really heavy information. But to understand nanoparticulates are invisible to the naked eye, even under a regular microscope. Like you need like scanning electron microscopes to see these materials. And they're being used as additives in all sorts of consumer products, products that we would consume, products that, sunblock. I had no idea that there's all these nanoparticulates. Now, they're not necessarily all part of necessarily nano machines, but that is the goal, is that they're imagining that we will end up with nets that they can begin to self-assemble in our bodies and manage our tissue function, and of course most of it is all put as something that's only helpful, like we're managing, repairing tissue for people with joint damage or something, and you can't imagine that that would be a problem. But ultimately, when you start to see how they are treating other living systems, other cell-based biological systems like yeast and like fungi and different things, it's pretty wacky. I mean, it's pretty Frankenstein-y, the kinds of stuff that they're pursuing. So to imagine that they would just stop there and not consider using larger beings, especially, I guess, the Xenobot stuff that just came out, this week, about these living robot cells that now can like scoop around little powders and make other buds and other, reproduce in new ways, new novel ways. But don't worry, we won't let it get out of the lab. Like, I think I remember like these, whatever, Marvel has a movie about that. Yeah. So we have to start thinking about talking about nanotechnology. And I did tweet out yesterday, I think, a really good paper on the history, at least in the US, of like how this has come about. And it's very hard for the layperson, again, as with so many of these things, to figure out like what's smoke and mirrors and what's real, because we don't have electron microscopes and we don't have access to what these people are really doing. So all we can do is see from these papers and then presume, go from there.
Yeah. And if you're not familiar with like some of the stuff, there's a really great video. It was Allison did a three-part section on nanotech, three-part video live stream, three live streams, and I edited it down to, initially it was 10 hours worth of content. So I edited it down to a little over 5 hours. And so I'd send it to people like, oh, this is 5 hours. I was like, well, it used to be 10 hours, so relax. But it's, I called it Digital Empire, and it actually got banned from YouTube, but I do have it on Rumble and Odyssey, and I think that's it. Oh, Vimeo. I have it on Vimeo too. So I'll share the link here at the end of this for that, and I'll share that in the comments as well as soon as I pull it up. But that's a really great primer on nanotech. It's like I said, it's 5 hours. You can watch it in shifts or whatever. But yeah, the nanotech thing is hugely important. And we visited Rice University down in Houston last month, and some of the research they're doing is, I mean, they talk about it like they're just casual about it, and you're just like, this is terrifying. Like self-assembling nanoparticles, or I was like, no. But I mean, we think about the mentality of the system, and I've been involved with efforts to try to get fluoride. Like here in Denver, we've gone to like the Denver Water Board and presented all this information that fluoride is a neurotoxin, and any benefits for it are for your teeth are really topical. Like, it's not supposed to be ingested. So it's like the fact that like they still are putting fluoride in our water all over the country just blows my mind. I mean, it's a neurotoxin. Anyways, so yeah, these are the people in charge.
Imagine how smart we'd all be.
I know, like, yeah, I do wonder about that whole like, what's your
pineal gland,
your pineal gland or whatever. There's the claims about that. I don't know if it's true or not, but who knows? But definitely, I do know we shouldn't be ingesting fluoride. I mean, it's natural. There's natural fluoride in like water that you pull up off the spring water or whatever. But that's not the kind of fluoride. This is an industrial waste product that they're actually using. Read up the history of it. It's kind of a trip. So let's do one more quick question. I've got a bunch of questions, but we'll get to the rest of you guys' questions at the end of this. We've got a 50-minute segment of interview we're going to show. And as we're watching the interview, think about questions during that as well, and feel free to put them in. So I'll do one more question, and then we'll start the interview segment, and then we'll come back in about 50 minutes, a little over 50 minutes, and we'll take more questions. This question is, can you comment? Oh, no, we already did though. How do you think the supply chain problems fit into the whole picture?
Interesting. Well, I mean, clearly they're going to work on managing consumption, managing your access to different consumer goods. I mean, that's because the supply chains are all connected with the climate and the sustainable development goals. I think ultimately it does go back to the technocracy concept of running the world on an energy-based economy, this idea of energy inputs and energy outputs. So when they get us on the blockchain, like we're all part of the supply chain. Like all of the metaverse is linked into the supply chain of some, we're all consuming and being consumed as data analytics. I think they're intentionally breaking supply chains. And then the goal will be, like in the ports and things, will be to impose blockchain supply chain tracking systems. Again, that's going to be tied to the environmental, social governance portfolios. So, they'll be
Real
tracking.
Quick, can I interrupt you? Do you want to just
Yeah.
explain just really briefly what ESG is, just to give people a...
Sure. Well, so ESG is environmental social governance. And within the larger social impact space, it's roughly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And so this idea is behind sort of the stakeholder capitalism concept, the circular economy. 21 global capital has now realized they have seen the error of their ways, and they're going to come up with a new and better kind of version of capitalism and global supply chains, and we're just going to manage them on dashboards for data analytics. So we're going to manage our environmental impact, and this is part of the carbon offset trading. We'll destroy a natural forest, but then we'll plant some sort of hybrid trees that are as a carbon sink. We'll be doing things that are essentially destroying nature, but then remaking it as a synthetic version of nature and saying that it counts as an impact commodity. So that's the environmental side. The social side is, general impacts on society and culture. But I do think increasingly it's also going to be managing culture, production of culture. And then governance. Technically, governance is not government like of a municipality or a nation state, but it's corporate governance. And this is things like, well, we have more people that fit in this category on our board, and that's sort of the governance model. And so all of those things are aspirational. They'll say this is the data analytics where we are now, and this is where we hope to be, and then if we can improve our performance, these key performance indicators in these areas, like we're a much better company. And then I think increasingly within these portfolio allocations, they're going to start requiring people to have a certain amount of ESG stocks in the portfolios. So that's going to be a way of controlling the global economic system. But again, I don't think that it's controlling the global economic system to disadvantage people like BlackRock. BlackRock is actually like running the ESG alignment and metrics for the EU. So these ESG metrics are not actually meant to really level the playing field. They're meant to put in impose a lot of data analytics, a lot of supply chain tracking, impact tracking, sensor network tracking that will feed into the creation of the metaverse, because essentially everything becomes ubiquitous sensing so that they can capture and get credit for every supposed good thing that they do. But a lot of the enforced behavior change is going to be behavior change on behalf of individual people, as opposed to looking structurally at the whole system. Like, why do we have all of these giant global supply chains? Why do we have all of this decentralized just-in-time production? Why do we not have more local economies, regionally controlled economies, things that are legitimately sustainable? None of this is about starting to deconstruct and take power away from multinational corporations. It's all about like doubling down on all of this and making a new game, and the new game is impact investing. So anyway, so it was about supply chain. So I think it's a broken on purpose scenario. They're going to use control of supply chains to manage populations. They're going to use control of food supply chains to keep people in line. They're going to use, most of the entities that are involved in rolling out the fourth industrial revolution, like they've got a lot of resources, the Walmarts of the world, the Amazons of the world. They can weather a couple of like downturns in holiday shopping seasons way more than small local shops and things. So I think part of that is also tightening the noose on Main Street businesses and non-franchise businesses, and then further concentrating resources in the hands of these larger global entities that ultimately they'll probably say that, like, on a dashboard they look greener than regular people, like regular local businesses. And then within the supply chain, they need for us to be tracked with a digital identifier so that they consume, in terms of our environmental impact and our environmental footprint. And that goes way back. I did a video, I don't know, maybe early in the spring, about the recycle bank, which Philadelphia had, one of the first recycle bank programs, which it's this behavioral nudge unit. And it is really innocuous thing. Like, we would get these nice, it was always coveted to get a nice recycle bin that wasn't the 5-gallon bucket, that was a little bit bigger. And, when those came out, they were so sought after. And then they gave us barcodes to put on the bin so that they would track the recycling by communities, and that they would give you script for being a good recycler. Only nobody in my neighborhood was recycling because we were getting script. We just recycled because it's what you do. Like, you put out the trash, you put out the recycling. Nobody ever used the script. But the script idea of the recycle bank points, which were only good for certain things that you could redeem them for, this was the very early stages of, like, good behavior credits. And that came out of Wharton. The guy who invented that came out of Wharton. So the city of Philadelphia was an early prototype in sort of behavioral, like, non-cash leaderboard systems for green behavior.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone today about all the businesses that went under in the past year and a half, and how like, those businesses aren't coming back, and a lot of that business has been swallowed up by the Walmarts and Amazons, and yeah, again, it's by design. That's that was the point. Okay, so let's we're going to show this segment. It's a little over 50 minutes long, and then we'll come back. If you have questions, just type them into the either on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll answer your questions when we return. All right, so we are back. Thank you, guys. I've been following the threads here and everything. And yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, I popped a little thing on the thing. I realized I made a mistake when I was talking about the academic who was pushing against the compartmentalization of academia. I also noticed I say academia, which is kind of funny. Anyway, it was actually Marshall McLuhan. I said Aldous Huxley, but that was my mistake. I wanted to correct that because that bugged me after the fact. I was like, I think I was talking about the wrong person. Anyways, Allison, can you? Oh shoot, we're not hearing you. Hold on. Did you do so? Oh, hold on.
Didn't do anything.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we got you. All right.
Hello.
Hey, we hear you now. Sorry about that. I had you muted. Allison, so what are your initial thoughts after watching this after a year and a half, I guess now it's been?
Well, I was against blockchain for a while. I've staked out my my concerns about blockchain identity position. Yeah, I'm glad to have that on the record. I mean, I still feel very strongly that, I feel, it was interesting to hear me, it's like, talking about the schools and the doctors and stuff, and that it's, starting to shift back in the education space. And so, it's hard to know exactly how quickly the learning ecosystem model is going to come online, which is, I guess, why I hesitate to make predictions. I think it's still, things are marching not in a good direction and towards a destabilization of the educational system. And I think that the ramp up for vouchers and alternative payment systems is going to happen. And I just heard that, a dear friend who is, an activist in this space and a 20-year teacher in the San Francisco school district, who had taken a strong position about their medical information not being put in online databases by the San Francisco school district, was essentially sort of pressured through legal proceedings that they pursued very clearly to a point of no longer wanting to be in that school district and leaving and making other arrangements. So, and this is someone who is very talented and skilled teacher. And so I think that there is a lot of destabilizing social systems right now, and things are coming back, but not the same, with a lot more restrictions. And and I'm curious to see what happens this winter. My husband works for local university, and I keep thinking, like, well, when are they going to have some sort of flare up and send everybody home again? He's convinced that's not going to happen. I'm not so convinced, but we'll see going into the flu season, how the numbers are managed and what the policy rollouts are. I don't know. I'm curious what people think. I mean, I don't know if there's questions in there or thoughts. I
Yeah,
know sort of what I think. There's not
right.
like, I haven't had an abrupt change of position. It's moving apace, maybe not as exactly as quickly as I thought, but the trajectory is consistent with what I think I predicted.
Yeah. Um, well, I have a few questions. There was actually a little bit of a conversation that I would like to. It wasn't really a question, but there was a little bit of conversation about like naming this thing, communitarianism, communism,
Yeah.
capitalism, fascism, and I made
I
the
didn't even
comment.
really know communitarian was a thing.
Yeah, you use
When
that.
we were having this interview. Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
know, right?
There's folks out there that are really hell bent on, just
This is the name. Right,
this is
yeah.
what it is, and this is all it is. It's communitarianism, and even if you say anything in support of community, which, like, my concept of community is different, but the folks that are really pushing the communitarian thing are very aggressive, and there is truth to what, a lot of what they're saying is true. I mean, there is an, a there is some truth in what they're saying. It's just, I think the challenge is like pigeonholing it into one thing, because it's, there's a lot of different things going on. And I think, like, the comment that I had made was, I think it's more important to say what it is, like, say, rather than, we don't necessarily need to name a name, because people don't agree on what these terms mean. Like, capitalism means different, communism, fascism. You don't even get agreement on that. So, and it ended up dividing people. And I'm like, you know what? We can sidestep all of that and just say what it is. Like, this is what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know what
Right.
I mean? So
That's what I
that's
do.
yeah,
Here's the map. It's this big. These are all the people. Like, what,
right.
because really, I mean, in my frame is this stuff goes back at least probably to the Roman Empire. And I know there are a lot of people who follow like mystery schools and things that like take it way further than that, and I don't have that expertise, so I can't really chime in much beyond. But like, clearly the papacy, the Roman Empire, like, whatever name we give it today wasn't the name that would go all the way back. And so I don't find that the labels are particularly helpful, because I think once you label things, then it tends to polarize the conversation. I prefer just to say, like, these are the players, these are things they're doing that I find morally abhorrent, and we should refuse this.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get into some of these questions. And if you do have a question, just so I can filter out the questions between just the comments that people are making, write the word question at the beginning. That way I know it's a question for Allison. So, okay. Has Allison uncovered any particular areas where these efforts at achieving a nano synbio fintech panopticon are particularly vulnerable to specific forms of resistance? So, like, what are your thoughts on challenging, like, or stopping this or resisting this? Or have you seen vulnerabilities or ways that this could be maybe?
Well, I'm still working my way through Alana's book. I will sort of defer. There are people who have done deeper dives into um, the nanotech space. Also, my friend Steffers at A Piece of Mindful has been doing a lot of research in that area. And I know Sophia Smallstorm has done work as well. I mean, I think ultimately the concern is that an injection takes things to another level, and especially injections that are tied to a digital identity system. from a data analytics point of view and the nanotechnology point of view is like a step beyond simply regular normal environmental exposure. And based on what Alana has said is like there's some recommendations around, I think it's maintaining an alkaline body chemistry and avoiding sugar and eating clean and don't go outside like an hour once it start raining for like an hour. Like there's some various things about like environmental contamination. And I know that there's individuals, and I don't have the person's name, but who's, I believe, Canadian, who's been working on different sorts of like buckets or something, like nanotech extraction, like that. I mean, and that's the challenge is that we're all subject to environmental exposure. So it's not like a one-time thing. Like I myself was looking into, I guess there's some like baths, like borax and baking soda and Epsom salts and different things that are supposed to help with detoxing. So the active holistic health space isn't my main area. Like I'm sort of the impact finance blockchain person, but I'm trying to get up to speed and learning. So to a certain extent, I've at least bought some stuff and I've soaked a few times. I haven't gotten to the point of doing the nano extraction bucket. Yeah, so I don't know exactly how to go about it. I mean, I think something that Alana raises too in her books and her interviews, she talks about the fact that like we're all sort of, we have these synthetic elements in us at this point. And for her, she comes at things very much from a Steiner viewpoint, and that this is sort of a sacred spiritual engagement. And so part of that for her, like one of it is taking care of your physical body to the extent that you can, limiting exposure, detoxing, various detoxing protocols that some people are more familiar with than I am, but I'm sure you can look them up online. But then the other is sort of a spiritual practice, because some of this is a parasitic entity, like it's these parasitic harmonic consciousnesses that are these like machines, right? And so you have to fortify not only your physical body as best you can, but your spiritual practice and your faith positioning in all of this, because it is, I think it is a parasitic force in that way. So I guess that's pretty much what I have to say about the nano at this point. Maybe, I mean, Alana's book is like this thick and I've got about this much so far. So maybe by next week I'll have more information.
Gotcha. Well, I think the idea that came up in this interview, which is the hats with the pool noodles, might be a good idea. I personally just use bubble wrap and duct tape, but everyone's got their own methodology. Okay. Did you guys meet Jeff Kripal at Rice? Also, did you know the Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the Devos dynasty rules, was the first city in the country to fluoridate the water supply? We did not meet him, and I did not know that. Allison?
Yeah, no, we didn't actually get in any of the buildings at Rice. We did. I think we have those last two to go, Jason. Those are the last couple. Jason's
I'm
like,
almost
we did a lot
through.
of stuff in Texas, and I'm like, we did.
I'm almost through editing them. Yeah.
Yeah, so like the last couple spots on our way out of town were at the Houston Medical Campus, where Rice has a sort of a collaborative biotech lab, and then on the campus specifically. But we didn't have any direct contacts. I mean, mostly I went because James Tour, who's a key figure in working in the laser produced graphene space, is there, and a lot of nanofabrication. And then I believe it is James Smalley, who got the Nobel Prize for, I don't know, identifying these buckyballs, which are these fullerenes, this sort of carbon 60 buckyball carbon nanotube structures back in the day. And so it sort of, Rice at that point became a center for nanotechnology research, which is why we wanted to highlight it. And it's interesting because it's a relatively small, I mean, it's well-regarded school, but it's not a major research institution that is running so many DARPA military contracts. And then, it has this collaborative space with the university system is very interesting. I didn't know about Grand Rapids. It's interesting now I think about it. I mean, actually have all of these projects in the back of my mind that I want to get back to working on. But Steffers and I were looking at the issues of water and programmable water and graphene. And, you know, I know DeVos actually was involved in, I think, a boxed water program that might have been connected to Flint at some point. So I do think that there is some element in terms of engineering the composition of water to advance sort of the larger resonant frequency, maybe gene expression, like within tissues. And so it would be interesting either both from on the fluoride side or other additions. You know, there's a lot of money going into the infrastructure bill too around water infrastructure. And I think increasingly there's going to be impact bonds tied to environmental bonds with water contamination, water structure that will include nanotech in them. So I think that Michigan is a central player. I know that the World Economic Forum is setting up shop in Detroit. And then part of this giant map that I made in Dallas, it extended to include, there was a company outside of Dallas in Richardson called Zyvex Labs, which has played for several decades a key role in nanomolecular fabrication, atomically precise fabrication. It's called Zyvex Labs. And they had gotten together for this nanotech program in 2007. But Rick Snyder, maybe I mentioned that the last time, but like that he was part of that gathering in 2007. So I think Michigan has a role to play, but I haven't. Maybe Detroit will be another giant map. I don't know. I feel like I know somebody on Twitter who's connected with Chattanooga. And so it seems like Chattanooga actually is a hotbed for a lot of this stuff and connected to Oak Ridge National Labs and Department of Energy. So I might have to do Chattanooga in between, but maybe Detroit and Michigan should be on the list because there's a lot going on.
So, yeah, here's a picture of James Tour. And this guy's kind of an interesting guy. He's like a very religious guy, but he's there at Rice University, and he's got a company called Universal Matter. And actually, Allison, the video that's premiering tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, if you check her channel, this will be live. So this is one of the site visits to Advanced Materials, and yeah, downright creepy research that they're up to out there. So
I mean, I would recommend James Tour has quite a few talks online. He's very out there about his faith practice informing his scientific research. And it is actually interesting if you listen to the story that he tells. He actually grew up Jewish and in high school worked at a gas station somewhere in New York City, where on Fridays they would throw out all the magazines of the gas station. So he would go and get like the Playboys and Hustler magazines. And he had a porn addiction. Like that's how he talks about it. And then he went to college and as a freshman became a born again Christian and like cleansed him of his addictive behaviors. And then he would, had been getting up at 5 a.m. to read Bible verses ever since, for the rest of his life, and became a very successful nanotechnologist. And so evidently his frame is that all of this stuff in terms of like turning the world into edible computing systems is God's plan. So
yeah,
yeah,
add religion to the mix. It's kind of terrifying. Who is the other guy, the Mormon guy that was like talking about the rules for gods on earth or whatever? What was his name?
Oh yeah, Lincoln Cannon. Yeah,
Lincoln Cannon. Yeah,
Lincoln Cannon,
yeah.
transhumanist.
Some of these people's belief systems are pretty creepy. Okay. Do you see cash disappearing fully? The shadow economy is the lifeblood of the economy. It will be so wild. I've thought a lot about that too. It's like they need to have some space, and I think they'll do it through crypto. But even the system itself still does a lot of like dark, money laundering, and they'll want to make sure that a space is left open for that. And I imagine it'll just be done with crypto. But like it's pretty clear to me that that is the goal, to get rid of cash completely. But do you have any thoughts on that, or comments on that, Allison?
Again, it's kind of like trying to figure out what's going to happen to all of these like expansive homes in affluent neighborhoods under this program. Like it's hard to imagine the physical reality of it just disappearing unless essentially they foreclose on all the homes and push people into storage containers in this, in the downtown and just let them go back to nature. Like there's some things I just can't quite picture, how it's going to happen in terms of the material reality of it. I mean, I know between talking to Deep D and being in touch with Raul about Latin America, like the informal economy is huge. I mean, the cash economy, the non on the books economy, especially in other countries, is the majority. And so, how does one just take that away? But again, DP has talked about different kinds of payment systems and digital payment systems that are making their way even into relatively small villages. So, and I think it's like I've talked about with with what Stephen Newcomb says, is like the people on the shore watching the ships like couldn't imagine what was on that ship, like the mindset of the people on the ships, until later they realized what a huge problem, but they didn't even have a word or a concept for how bad it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like that what was arriving. And I sort of feel the same way with these the blockchain systems and the digital currency and the sensor networks. Is by the time people like get up to speed on what's about to hit them, like it will be in place. And it's very hard to communicate a concept to people who have no point of reference.
Right.
They just have no point of reference for it. And and I would say even what's still the case is that the whole your freedom tokens or whatever idea is that, like, I think that the tokens for the masses aren't even going to be anything that resembles actual money anymore. It's going to be, you earn points for rights and privileges. It's going to be like little tickets, little chits, behavior tokens that allow you to do a few things outside the norm. And then everything else is pretty depressed. But again, it's hard. It's very hard to picture the time frame on this. I mean, I know many people in the US are already like have a very precarious existence. And I don't have a good sense about how many people actually have things in retirement savings or whatever. Like, that's sort of my question. Like, do they just clean it all out? I don't know. It's the finance, that part of it isn't my expertise. That's probably something John Titus or some of those folks would have a better understanding of. I can't imagine like all of a sudden people's 401ks being converted into crypto or these stable coins. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Okay, well, I want to ask you guys, according to Facebook, we have two people watching on Facebook, and if that's the case, next week I might just do a streams directly to YouTube and skip Facebook, because it does take extra bandwidth. But I also think these numbers that they give us are not accurate, both YouTube and Facebook. I don't think they're honest about the actual numbers. So who knows what their actual is. So if you are watching on Facebook, just make a little quick comment, just say hi, just so I can see, because this is a little test. I want to just actually just it's a little experiment of mine.
Oh, really? Only, I don't know, maybe since I left Facebook, we're all
you were
my social credit currency on Facebook has dropped.
That's right. Allison, oh my God, block that one. I heard that Florida let their membership with the National School Board Association expire. How do we interpret events like this in the framing of the Great Reset and the rise of mega regions? Thoughts on that?
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I have a hard time knowing exactly what the National School Board Association does. So, I mean, I know that there are a lot of these different membership organizations. As I said before, I think in some respects, like the Florida, Texas counterpoint, like dialectic, is something that's meant to sort of look like the radical um, difference to California and New York. But it's a different flavor, a different way of getting people on blockchain. I was just revisiting, and if people want to check out my YouTube yesterday, I put a couple of video clips from a 2016 panel on education savings accounts. And that panel was at the Foundation for Excellence in Education fee, which is Jeb Bush's organization, Excel in Ed. And they're very much about pushing digital wallets for education and school choice. And I think I just noticed today someone shared that Michael Bloomberg is putting $75 million or something into charter schools. He's also bankrolling some school choice movements in California. And I had some people trolling me on Twitter that were from the California school choice. Essentially, what I said was, you're not telling people the whole story about choice, because choice, when it shows up, is going to very likely end up, if not in the immediate first round, at least in later rounds, as a digital voucher tied to digital identity, which will mean that all of your community-based resources, if they're approved to be reimbursed through the wallet, are going to be collecting data and transmitting data back for these impact markets. And within that panel, that 2016 panel, the model was actually in Las Vegas. And there was a debit card program in Arizona. But the folks from Nevada were saying, essentially, this was a program that was going to be situated in the Treasury, and that the people who were advancing it understood educational vouchers as banking products, that they were finance products, they were banking products, they were not education programs. And so I think that speaks to this tokenization of assets and futures betting across the board. And I will say that Florida has been central for years in online learning, in digital education. INACOL, the International Association of K-12 Online Learning, came out of Florida. One of the first big virtual school systems was based in Florida as well. That's what's going to be coming. And I would not be surprised if it also contains some virtual reality apprenticeships or education modules, because that's very big in the virtual reality and simulation industry in the Orlando area. And you've also got Magic Leap VR there. So, I think that they need to advance non-traditional options for education, so that they can start to investigate and get the systems in place for wearable technology, telepresence, educational models. And I think both Florida and Texas are very well positioned for that.
Right. Okay. What cell phone, computer, and other technology brands, if any, do you feel are safe using?
I mean, other people take harder positions on that. I don't think any of it's particularly safe. And I think people who would like to advance certain brands over other brands, I'm not about markets or choices or telling people or spokespeople for any of that. And I kind of do question, just do your own research and decide for yourself. I don't have necessarily, I don't have any confidence that any of them are better than others. Once if you look at Surveillance Valley and, look into Signal and Tor and all the stuff, they lift these things up so that you embrace these products. And it's all I'm not a coder. I'm not a cybersecurity intelligence person. I don't know these things. And I actually don't really feel super confident that any of the people who assert that they're the white hat version of this, that you can truly trust that. So
Yeah.
it's the Wild West. I guess people just decide for themselves.
Yeah, there are some things you can do to try to minimize it, but at the end of the day, I think the NSA, they're going to get anything they want, or the people, behind the scenes. But there's a guy named Rob Braxman, who I actually follow on YouTube a lot, that he talks a lot about the phones and de-Googling your phones. And there's things you can do to try to minimize it. But I'm pretty skeptical of anything that's claiming to be secure. Like I think that they have backdoors, and like I said, this was all built, like this is all DARPA military technology. So,
The
um,
internet, you know,
right.
it is built that way.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
I mean, the tin cans and the strings tend to work really well. That's the challenge though, because it's like we're even this we're on Facebook and
I
YouTube here,
know.
and they're like throttling us. They're not preventing us. They're not allowing us to even utilize this space, and it's just going to get worse as their algorithms get better and their technology gets better. And and I think what they want to do is they want to have the appearance that you're actually talking to people. I saw something happen recently on Facebook where it's actually like been it's put up some walls, and I don't know how it decided like, oh, you can tag this person and not this person, but like my tagging ability has been massively throttled recently on Facebook. So they're going to continue to play these games, but they want the appearance. They want us to have the appearance of this is somehow democratic and fair, and like they're letting us actually communicate while we're not actually communicating with anybody. I mean, if you think about it, according to YouTube, we got 34 people watching. I used to do events and I could get more than 34 people in the room. So, at some point, I think the technology is just going to be like, hey, we need, the technology isn't really doing shit for us. So, um, you know, it's a tough one. uh, let's see. Living in a rural area versus a city. Will living in a rural area be safer than living in a city? I actually think I personally don't want to live in a city. I would much rather live in a rural area. But eventually, they're coming for the rural area too. But the cities are where it'll be concentrated. That's the smart city. Thoughts on that, Allison?
Well, I mean, I've said this before, but I think it's going to come after everywhere because what we're dealing with is a weaponized atmosphere, and the nanotechnology is in the atmosphere, and the frequency weapons are in the atmosphere, and um, even different 5G and stuff, a lot of it is satellite based. So, they'll have it in the remote areas. I would just say, because I think that this is a spiritual engagement, like stand up for what you love. Jason, if what you love is being in a rural area, then that's good. Like if that's where you feel like you want to be, that's good. But I actually really loved being in the city. I mean, I think that that's been part of that what's been so crushing for me the past, year and a half is that I appreciated the vibrancy and the intellectual stimulation and the camaraderie and the opportunities and the culture um, of being in Philadelphia. Like I loved my city actually. Like I loved that I was part of like we were like the underdog city and we were kind of like we you know there was a lot of stuff that I loved that got taken away, and it was if not just the geofencing things, but like the heart of it got pulled out by this psychological warfare. And then I felt abandoned in a place that looked like the place I loved, but it wasn't. And, I still haven't totally given up on that. And for me, I would prefer to take a position of advocating for the vitality of cities as not smart cities, even though it's an uphill battle. Because realistically, I'm in my 50s. Like, I'm not someone who's going to go live in the woods, like, realistically. Like, I'm not, um, I just don't see that happening, especially because the rest of my family wouldn't be doing that either. So, unless things get really, really bad, like, I would prefer not to abandon and still advocate for the community that I felt I had, that could somehow be restored. But my choice isn't everybody's choice. So I would say make the choice that feels right to you, but don't do it from a place of feeling like you're escaping it.
Right.
Like understand that it is a broad and cohesive takeover, and then find the place that gives you strength and that gives you purpose in your life, and then engage with this from that location wherever that makes sense for you.
Yeah.
And clearly, it's probably going to be more challenging in the areas that have concentrated populations and, militarization and other things. But that doesn't mean that from a principled standpoint, like to me, I feel like spiritually just leaving out of fear, and that primarily that place is allowing it to the agenda to move forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I would say that yeah, if you're looking to escape this, forget about that because they're indigenous communities had sustainable off-grid systems and that got swallowed up by this thing, and it's the same thing. We're dealing with the same thing. Um, and so for me, it's just like in the city, I'm just worried that they're going to get to the point where they're going to be like, oh, lockdown, you can't leave or whatever, and I'm like, the one thing that gives me peace of mind is actually going out into the woods, and so like
Yeah.
I'd like to have that mobility and freedom while I, fight this thing in my way of, trying to educate myself and others. But yeah, the idea that you're going to run away from this. Derek Brose was in town and he gave a presentation uh, a few months ago, and he was like, it was kind of funny because he's like, we can't be pessimistic about, we need to be positive, and then he's like, but we can't fight this. We're not going to be able to stop this, and we just need to, go out and find some land or whatever and live off, live away from it, and build our own blockchain systems or whatever. And I just totally disagree with that. I don't think that that's taking into account what we're actually dealing with here, and I think it's just a situation where we either stop this thing or we're done. You're not going to find an island that you're going to just run away from this thing on. I wish that were the case. I mean, I don't even wish that were the case because then it means all these other people and these other life forms are destroyed. I mean, this is a battle much bigger than just us saving ourselves, Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my thought. Do you think
And I
20?
would say, I think
Yeah, go ahead.
in this in between moment too, the push for telepresence labor is that there's probably going to start to be a shift into some rural areas. Like I know somebody in the Dakotas, and when I started looking into nanotechnology, there was a ton of nanotechnology in South Dakota. And that's kind of surprising to me. But when you start looking at cheaper, like essentially what they're doing is they're setting up almost like gig pop-up labs for like biohacking and different things and like telepresence work, where maybe you can have access to more sophisticated lab equipment remotely. And so I think that there's going to be, that's what's been birthed out of this lockdown situation, is that you've got a lot of people who are just transplants. They just pick up their job and they do it from wherever. So I think in the in between time where they haven't fully gotten the mega regions together, that there is going to be some dispersal of people into rural, mountainous like rural communities or midwestern rural communities, or places where the cost of living is lower, and then they have telepresence. I know Julianne has spoken about Tulsa, that they had incentives for people to relocate to Tulsa and work from Tulsa. So there's going to be like the second tier mid-level cities in maybe less choice geographical regions that are going to start to offer relocation packages, and then the widespread adoption of the telepresence model economy and even teleeducation and everything is going to, I think, and who knows how long it's going to last before they get people locked into a more mega region format. But I think they're going to start moving people around at will. That's part of the game, and that the telepresence economy will be part of that, and part of maybe even the infrastructure. Like maybe they will designate sort of mid-sized ruralish cities as like telepresence hubs, and then start to build up the smart infrastructure in those cities as well. So I think that there's a range of phases. When at the beginning people were saying like, what is the look for 2030 to 2050? I don't think it's going to be a hard lockdown immediately, but they're going to be gradually reshaping what the work environment looks like, and what the aspirational geographies look like. And some of that has to do with the telepresence and the opportunity zones and the infrastructure, and where BlackRock wants to put its money, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think 2023 is a significant date for digital ID? Was the next question.
Hmm. I'm not particularly clear on those that as a specific date. I don't know if there's a particular report or something that people are looking towards or
Yeah,
an
I'm not sure.
esoteric number system.
That was just a
Yeah.
question. There wasn't any more detail.
I mean, for me, like the people who are already on digital ID, it's an important, India was the first use case, right, with Aadhaar in the digital ID. So, like, by whose standard, right? Like, if you're already part of the digital, like when I came into the space, my frame was around, displaced refugee populations and retinal scanning, and so, unless you're talking about it being linked to like central bank digital currency or something, which is possible. I'm not familiar with like a hard and fast date on the digital ID part.
Okay. Any guess on why so many CEOs are retiring at once? And we had this once before too. At the beginning of it, there was a wave of retirements, and now we just had another wave. So it is interesting when you see a whole bunch of CEOs retire, and or commit suicides, which happens too. But anyways,
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I'm always kind of no, I don't have any thoughts about
No thoughts about that. That's all right. You're
retirement.
supposed to have
I mean,
thoughts on
maybe some
everything.
people like know what the plan is. I mean, I don't know. Like maybe
Yeah.
they've got enough to buy their island or something at this point.
Okay. So, do you know about graphene hydroxide? A German chemist, Dr. Andreas Nowak, talked about it and said it was in the injection. So that the idea that there's graphene in the injections, and that it's different from graphene oxide. Uh, and apparently he died shortly after making this statement. So, do you know anything about that? I mean, I know you covered that a little bit, um, and there's some others. There's another group of scientists. I actually saw them on the high wire that are claiming to have found graphene, but I didn't know if it was graphene hydroxide or graphene oxide. But do you have anything to say
I
about that
haven't
at the
had a
moment?
chance to watch that the video. I mean, I have to say there's part of me that whenever like I tend to shy away from the hysterical things. I mean, no offense, but like when it's like razor blade, blah blah blah, like guy die, like to
And the
me
apple,
well, I mean, I realize that what we're navigating is psychological warfare, and I think that people in the resistance space have to understand that they're being subject to it as well. You know what I mean? So in terms of energetics and stuff like that. So when I see these really inflammatory um takes on things, it makes me question, right? Then so I mean, clearly graphene in various forms has been used as an adjuvant. My position continues to be I think the goal is not mass death, but biocompatibility. And I haven't really seen a significant enough change to change my position on that. I think biocompatibility with a side of um, harm, either like related to cardiac function or neurological function that can then be market creation for these various neuroprosthetics and wearable technologies, is probably much more in line with what is desirable for them in terms of a market shaping and getting the neural prosthetics and getting the nanotechnology systems into us. Um, so if the premise is that there's some frequency technology that's going to cause mass death, I would hope that's not the case. Like again, I have any insider knowledge? I don't. I feel like a lot of what's happening is about ginning up panic in communities, and I guess my question is to what end is that? So I would just consume your media with the awareness that their goal is to hijack your consciousness, and it's happening on both sides. So weigh the information, consider what you want to do about it, and you know, and let's see. I mean, it's possible that we could be wrong on that assessment, and that the harm could be much greater. But at this point, I don't think that I fully believe that with regard to injections and boosters and everything, people have made their choices, and their minds are committed. There are very few people along the road who are changing. Like maybe after the sixth booster, they'll change. But like at this point, adding this more inflammatory information, I don't think is going to wholesale change a lot of people's attitudes. So then to what end? I would say be mindful of it, and then be cautious and see.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
And
kind of
know that nanotechnology is and this synthetic biology is definitely a major part of the agenda.
yeah, I'm kind of curious, if there's going to be any cognitive dissonance in people once you realize that this isn't going away. Like this is a permanent thing, and there's always going to be new jabs, and there's always going to be new variants, and this is a way of life now. Like this is intended to be a regular thing. This is not, there's no going back. And so I'm kind of curious if at some point people will start to question it's you know what I mean? Like, it's like you realize that you're going to be getting a jab, several jabs a year, probably, or at least one or two a year for the rest of your life. That's what I think. And I think that's what their plan is. But who knows? What does Allison think of the collapse scenario or long emergency of global industrial civilization as described by James Howard Kunstler? Now, James Howard Kunstler, I actually have his book, Long Emergency, back there, but he talked a lot about the collapse, really based on like oil depletion and things like that. Are you familiar with Kunstler at all?
I know the name. I haven't read the book.
Okay.
I mean, I guess my position on the oil is that, I feel like that there are alternative energy sources that may be out there that are not necessarily ready to be brought center stage for economic reasons and other reasons yet. Like, I think that there's a lot of science that proceeds that is not open to the public. And so I'm actually, while my frame is that there is tremendous environmental harm that's being done within the globalized economic systems, and consumption, material consumption, and sort of unbridled economic growth, I don't necessarily buy into the collapse. I'm not a Malthusian. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be some peak oil and then that's the end, boof. Because I think that they're actually already developing these sort of, not that I necessarily approve of the nanotechnologies, but they're almost imagining like we're going to have new buildings built out of living materials that synthesize energy, and like they have these ideas, and these are things they're talking about out loud. Like, who knows what the things are that they have behind the scenes, but that for whatever reason, I mean, we know that the Teslas and the Keeleys, and there are these alternate options, and that we're not really meant to know about, like the Jason's work. So
Do you want to clarify that they're not talking about me?
No. Well, just the Jason scientists. It's sort of an elite group of scientists that are now managed under MITRE Corporation. But there's like the off the book science, and then there's on the book, and that's part of. I would highly encourage, if people haven't read Alana's fictional series Sub Rosa America. It was actually really helpful and for me in understanding some of the history of the deep state and secret societies and things. But the Jasons are part of that, but they're actually real. You can look them up. So yeah, I mean, I think that clearly the emergency scenario, the Malthusian scenario, plays into the cybernetic sustainable development goal agenda 21 engineering of the world, like through one global cybernetic machines harmonic system.
Yeah. It's also interesting that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it's also interesting the role that the oil companies are playing in this new fourth industrial revolution. I mean, and they're not just like, they're not just sitting aside like, oh, I guess we're out, but they're actually actively playing a part in this, right?
Oh, very much. And, I would say when I was doing my education work, I would run into things like, the oil companies were major players in this, like beyond the technology companies. Like I kept running into Exxon and thinking like, and it didn't quite make sense that it was just about training kids to be, geoengineers or something like that. It or training kids' minds to think about oil a certain way. I think they were definitely in the energy futures markets. And the more you look at, and this is what I'm trying to tease out right now, is that it seems that this idea of a forced transformation of life into a holographic like metaverse reality, and that's the kind of thing that is being advanced by this Japan Moonshot project. Like our Department of Energy and our National Science Foundation are hand in hand with them on that, as well as the EU Horizon 2020 project. And for me, it's very interesting that it's the energy departments that are behind that. So I tweeted a couple days ago, I said, it feels like that there's a new Manhattan project going that's around this like cyborg metaverse model that's happening through the Department of Energy, which is sort of the legacy of the Manhattan Project. Only it's out in the open. I mean, I'm sure there's some secret parts to it, and like nobody cares. Like if you sit down and you actually look at what all of the Department of Energy programs are working on, and that they're literally saying that they're going to advance a future of life as a cyborg, and then nobody like nobody's even talking about it. It's crazy for me to think about. So again, a lot of it is connected to Texas, and I think it's not just the extraction of the resource, but it's the speculation on the energy markets. And so if and that's what Enron was about, and then Milken had his own kind of speculation. So it's these energy trading financial products, where the energy companies, it's not just about the oil wells. It's actually new sets of infrastructure that are about extraction of data and speculation of data on data.
Right. So we'll just do a few more here, and then we'll come back on Sunday. This one's actually just a comment, but I thought I would put it up there. Don't forget about the Dallas and Citizens Council, and Ghislaine Maxwell's older sister at UT Dallas. So someone wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, I've got Christine in there, and I'm finally getting back into writing my blog. I just started today, and I kind of hit a wall after the summer, and I just, part of it is, guys, when you listen to this, these talks that we did in May of 2020, right? And they're all still pretty fresh and relevant.
Yeah.
But it's not getting out. Like the word didn't, not despite your efforts, Jason, like there were many people, despite 40,000 people hearing it, that nobody picked up this ball and ran with it. Like none of the big names, really, none of the people who had the big platforms picked up on this material. And and I'm not even saying they needed to do it with credit to us because it was about us. It's just the information. And I don't know if it's because it's a non-traditional frame, the worldview that's presented is non-traditional, and therefore it wasn't palatable. It didn't fit into the ticking the traditional boxes. But, I'm to the point of trying to start writing again, but I didn't want to just rehash everything I already said,
right?
Because it didn't work the first time. So
Yeah.
now I'm like, okay, well, what do I do? And so now essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to break out that giant map and make blogs connected to the Greek mythology. And, and part of that, the Molina family and Christine Maxwell are part of that scenario. So that's.
Yeah. Well, I was so naive when I did that interview. I was just like, because I started to piece, with your help, piece a lot of the stuff together. And I was like, oh, so that was in May. And I seriously thought, oh, by December, I really thought that, not in the mainstream or anything, but I thought within like the circles of people who were challenging the the narrative around COVID, and were resisting some of the lockdown stuff, I thought that they would get on board with like, oh, but do you want to know why all this is happening? Do you want to know what the point of this, what the purpose is, the goal is? And it hadn't happened. It still hasn't happened to the extent that it should. And like, it's kind of frustrating because it's like there's certain pieces of it that certain people won't really incorporate into it, namely the social impact. I don't know why that there's like there's a fear around challenging like markets and challenging blockchain. Like those are the two big things where people are like stuck on, like they don't want to talk about the role, because that is the um what do they call it? My brain just farted. Anyway, so I was pretty naive coming into this. I was like, oh yeah, by December we'll actually have a conversation happening around this. And here we are, like, with 35 people watching on YouTube, and that's not to work. There are other people that are adding, really important pieces to it, but there is a new system that's being put into place that not very many people are really grasping yet, unfortunately. But hopefully, that will change.
Well, I mean, I will say though, in the past 18 months, the number of big name platforms in this space who have become affiliated in some way with a blockchain system are very high. I mean, people with the larger platforms, whether that is blockchain media affiliations, whether that is crypto investment, whether that is some sort of blockchain social media platform, phones. I mean, you really almost can't throw a rock and not hit somebody in who has a major platform in the resistance movement that doesn't have ties to some sort of blockchain technology.
Right.
And it's a problem because
And
then
and
it
remember,
becomes,
it's interoperable. These things are being designed so eventually that they'll be interoperable. So, I mean, that's an
well, they'll be
important.
interoperable, but they'll also be conditional. Like we know that the central bank digital currency transactions, the main places that people will have to spend their money is not going to accept the kind of crypto that people have. Like it's a total fake out. It's all a total fake out. And, and then once you add in using the interoperable data to feed the machine learning and feeding these speculative markets and data analytics on the secret network, it's horrific. But yeah, I mean, I don't see things turning around because I continue to be targeted for raising these questions.
Right.
And, people just got to own their own shit. You make your choices. And I truly feel that once people have some sort of engagement within the crypto space, it's just an energetic connection that takes them over and that they just can't think critically about it anymore.
Right. Um, so have you already talked about the voice of God technology, or have you ever gone into that where they can make you think you're hearing voices? A recent TED Talk actually confirmed that this technology exists. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, the early computing, I mean, it's always been about like Joe Licklider at MIT. His background was in psychoacoustics, so the acoustic element is really important. I think I'm based here in Philadelphia, and we are one of the centers for cochlear implants, and so I think there's an element, going back and research around acoustic implants. So yeah, I mean, I've talked to people who have been targeted. I know of the technology. I mean, I also know that I have on my YouTube channel, and I'm trying to remember what the date of the experiment, but it's maybe 5 years ago that they were actually using frequency to do uh, what do you say? Like sending thought signals from one brain to another person, like, and they have it on video that they were doing. I've like the word has escaped me, but like projection of your thoughts into another person's consciousness without a device, actually. So yeah, the stuff. I mean, brain is the new battlescape. I mean, that's what James Giordano has said, and there's a gentleman who has done he just finished his PhD thesis in 2019 on synthetic programmable hallucinations. So literally they are trying to get these nanoparticles beyond the blood-brain barrier so that they can affect consciousness, that they can monitor consciousness, and that they can affect it. And it's very unsettling, because I think maybe it's in a later part of the interview, but I was talking about marinage, as being the model, like escaping to the swamps, and then what does mental marinage look like in this space? So
the next one here is back to this. The next one here is actually just a comment, but I thought it was worth mentioning that Saudi Wealth Fund has donated $50 billion to Uber over the past few years. And they said data is the new oil. And there's something that you said once that I thought was really relevant, is that Uber is not a transportation company. It's a geo fencing company. Do you want to just say something about that?
Well, I think mobility is a key aspect of social control systems. And I think that the push will be for less private physical, like cars, and the push towards rideshare, and that will happen under the ESG markets. But I think increasingly these private companies are interested in actually taking over public transit systems. And that's something that's been happening. I mean, even several years ago, they were looking at taking over like rural school district busing systems. And so the ride sharing was happening in a privatized way. And so if you imagine your mobility in your transit system being linked to a privatized transit system that might include, buses or trolleys or subways, where to access the transit you have to have a QR code, and the QR code has various behavioral conditions attached to it. And then they're actually, I think, looking at creating transit as an impact metric, right? So you could use improvement of your public transit network tied to economic mobility, or to health benefits, or to some other quality of life benefit that you can attach a price to, and then you can connect it to a social impact market. And then you can track all of it through the QR codes, and then you can start to manage use of the system cybernetically, tracking all of the QR codes and the usage codes. Because sometimes they're even setting it up as free, like they want free transit, but what you're paying on, I think it's going to be set up as impact markets and data. And then those systems will be connected also to last mile mobility solutions, which will be the Internet of Things enabled bikes and scooters. And so if you can imagine, like if the goal were to get machine learning and to digitally simulate having a digital twin society, digitally twin cities, you've got sensors on all of these things. Like you've got your device because you need it to get the QR code on the bus, and so it can track you to the bus stop, it can track you when you get on the bus, it can track you when you get off the bus and get on the scooter, and vice versa, and all of the rides. And then all of that data gets input into the AI to sort of mirror the system. But then ultimately, both either for financial market reasons or strategic military reasons or social control reasons, they can start to tweak the models. And I think more and more we're seeing the digital twinning stuff come out in the open, and so they can start to decide when things are activated and deactivated in terms of your QR codes, and how many people can use the bus, and how many scooters you're going to have. And it's all going to be engineered through these AI systems that are beyond any sort of accountable government. And that's part of the huge aspect of the Michael Bloomberg What Works government, is that, we're going to have government efficiency and transparency on blockchain with open data, and we're going to run our government on data. But essentially that means that Oracle or Cisco or IBM are really your government. And like you might have a media personality stand in front and say that they're your mayor or your city council person, but they don't have any say because the algorithms are running the whole system. And I was just looking at a blog post that someone shared with me about sort of how corrupt the crypto exchanges are, and that they're sort of like offshore, deregulated, like the Wild West of all sorts of like really dark trading systems. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, that's that's pretty intense, this game, the crypto trading game of these, coins. But what happens once it's not just fiat currency, but these coins represent human capital portfolios and pay for success deals on people's lives. And then the markets become automated, and then they're connected to the smart sensors and your mobility and access. It's concerning. And so again, once we think about these markets and concentrations of wealth and power, it's not just the UBS banks or the Lloyds of London or, the SoftBank or pension funds. I mean, the sovereign wealth funds are a big part of it. And the Saudi sovereign wealth fund is actually their innovation fund was through SoftBank. And so they're working on the smart city development. And in that, in a very real sense, you can see the pivot in the nature of the big oil money moving into the new realm of empire, which is the data empire. Yeah.
And we'll do one more question. And let's see. Oh, have you read any of Ted Kaczynski's work, the Unabomber? Because he was very anti-technology.
I
I
know.
actually read his manifesto like years ago, but I don't really remember it that well. I just remember he was warning about technology. His solution wasn't really
I
great.
should, yeah, I should I should read it. I think I skimmed it a bit ago. Somebody shared it, but I didn't get through the whole thing. I mean, I will say I remember reading Jonathan Moreno's book called Mind Wars. He's a bioethicist at Penn, and I was really interested to find out that he was actually Kaczynski was subject to psychological experimentation while he was at Harvard. And I don't know that it was necessarily consensual psychological experimentation. So I can see now, like if you had the whole scope of what was going to be unfolding, like literally I try to imagine what it sounds like for me today to talk about the things that I talk about in terms of like neural weapons and, neural prosthetics and nanoparticles and blood-brain barriers. And I sound like, I'm very, very fringe. I can't imagine what it must have been like if someone, 20, 30 years ago had this knowledge and like no one to really explain it
Yeah.
to. And that even when you tried to say it out loud, it sounded unbelievable.
You're walking around the street, like talking to yourself, and they're like, "Oh, this guy's nuts," and when actually everything he's saying is actually true.
Right. I know.
Yeah, I mean, even now, it's just like for most of the people that I know, like I try to talk about this stuff, and I'm like, I know this sounds crazy, uh, but it's real. They're actually doing it, and I can show you. Show you how it's going down. But yeah, well, thank you, Allison. We'll do this again on Sunday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and we'll show one more segment and we'll take more of your questions. So think of your questions. Also, one of the things that, both Allison and I are trying to do is figuring out new ways to explain this, or so if there's certain things that you're not getting where you're like, you've heard it, but it's not clicking with you. Maybe bring that up and maybe ask a question in such a way that might help us to refine the explaining it or something.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say too, like, I mean, if people care enough to like spend a couple hours with us thinking about that, like questions that actually reflect some of what I'm trying to bring to the table about the impact markets and about the digital identity systems. I mean, there were a few questions about that, but in some ways it seems like a lot of the questions are outside material, like bringing in and sort of saying like, what do you think about this other thing? And so I guess what I'm hoping is that if what I say makes sense to you, is that we figure out better ways of articulating that in so that people can take this information to their communities, because literally we did this 18 months ago and it's not getting out. And so if you're here because you actually value the information that's being shared and it does make sense to you, then like we should be centering questions on, like, I need some clarification on these points, or like, how do you think this fits in with telemedicine, or how do you think it fits in with housing and homeless services or wearable technologies? Like, I mean, the Uber one is connected to that in some respects, and like the school board questions, but we need some of the nuts and bolts so that people can start to say, like, oh, Allison, like some of the things that you said here 18 months ago, I'm seeing in my community in this way. Like, what should I look for in opportunity zones, or what should I look for in smart materials, or like, what should I look for in my university system in terms of what departments? And because none of this stuff is hidden. Like, I just spent, several weeks looking into UT Dallas and all of the different programs that UT Dallas has going on in applied AI. And like, literally today, I just added an individual, and his whole research area, they were working on digital twinning, the digital twinning AI, health AI. And it was like, it lays it out. Like, his focus areas were artificial emotions, artificial consciousness, neurobiology, DNA computing, social robotics. Like, they tell you. So like, we need to be able to incorporate that piece of it, I think. So I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I was kind of hoping that people would say, like, oh, Allison, like, now I'm seeing that this makes sense in what I'm seeing in my communities, and that hasn't quite gelled in that way yet. But I don't know if it's because people don't, it still isn't clicking for them, or other narratives are hitting them more. Like, this is like, because we're in information warfare, so I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we deconstruct. I mean, and I'm not saying you have to necessarily buy into my narrative, but I'm assuming, like, if you're here, it's because you either want to know more or that it resonates. Like, how do we get through? Because literally, there's a battle for consciousness and people's attention right now.
Right.
And the stuff that I'm talking about is not getting it. It's not getting out there.
Yeah. And I need to do, like, I know Lynn Strawn Davenport is a collaborator and friend of ours, does a lot of that too. She's looking at locally. She's like, oh, Allison, check this out. Like, this is what's happening here. And here's this person. And
That's
like,
why Matt of Dallas is like this.
Yeah, it's massive. But I was like, I need to start doing that here with Colorado, because there's a lot of stuff going on here in Colorado that like I need to be paying attention to. But everyone can do that wherever they're at. They can find out, like, oh, what's happening in my own neck of the woods that relates to this. Would be interesting. So yeah, and then also too, like, if you haven't, like, I know people on here are probably already doing this, but check out Allison's YouTube channel, Alison McDowell. This is the one that's going to be premiering tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And but that's dealing with universal
These are
matter.
short form.
Yeah, they're
This is
short.
only, like, this is me like under 5 minutes. That's like
they're usually more than 5 minutes, but they're between 5 and 15 minutes typically. So, but yeah, check those out, because they're really great. There's a lot of great information in there, and like, you can do them in short little spurts. But yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and please come back on Sunday, and we'll do this again.